In the center of the planet, there sleeps the great Earth Dragon, a being of incomprehensible might. So immense is his power that even his dreams change the world, granting special individuals on the surface extraordinary powers beyond those of mortal men. This is the Earth of the Mirage universe, and you're listening to the Mirage Barrage. Victor's hands shook. He couldn't believe what Crystal Crusader had said to him. No, he didn't want to believe it. And why should he have to? The Amnalan Devil wasn't anything like the Great Earth Dragon, except for being an old god. But that didn't necessarily mean anything. Old gods weren't all the same, right? Certainly not. The legend went that they all entered the universe because of some celestial war. That meant they fought each other, so obviously they were different from each other. That was it. That was all there was to it. The Great Earth Dragon was one of the good ones, and this Amnalan Devil was something else. But how could he be sure? Still, he wouldn't let himself crack. He hadn't when Renaissance Man and Crystal Crusader had interrogated him. Disturbing as Crusader's story may have been, Victor wouldn't throw away his faith just for it, especially when they just wanted something from him. They had left him tied up, but he freed himself eventually. It had taken quite a while, and he heard the sounds of battle as the last ropes came free. It wouldn't matter, as long as the Archbishop still had the tablet. Victor ran past a room with an open door. Jonathan Fraser, the last Archbishop, was inside, facing away from the door. He had his head bent over, like he was ashamed. It stopped Victor in his tracks. "Brother Fraser," he called to him. Fraser turned slowly, and as soon as their eyes met, Victor knew. Victor sprinted off towards the main chamber, activating his power as he did, but aware that it still might be too late. Fraser the fool! No doubt the Stormbreakers had gotten to him. He had always lacked true vision. Victor should have seen it. Fraser would have been happy to have sat on his little throne as Archbishop forever, never making a move to wake the dragon. Of course he had been easy to sway, to break. Victor's heart pounded as he started to panic. Without the tablet, the ritual couldn't be performed. Everything would unravel, and he might not be able to do anything about it. His stupid power would be too late again. It was, but not for the reasons he thought. When Victor threw the doors open to the main chamber, he saw the defeated mass of the congregation. The Lady of Spirit, the Psychic Speedster, Director Adam, Prime Arsenal, they were all missing. Edward and Uriah Mass were lying on the floor, unmoving. But the Marquis, he was still on his feet. If only he had been one of the fallen. He laughed, the arrow dangling from his fingers. Victor had always hated Plan B. Of course the Marquis was eager for it. It was just as blunt and foolish as he was. To wake the dragon, just hit it with a rock, or an arrow, or poke it with a stick. Use the Marquis's power to physically touch it. Of course, the Marquis seemed completely indifferent to the blasphemous nature of the act. You don't throw stones at God. That was probably another reason the Marquis enjoyed the idea so much. Victor watched in horror as he released the arrow and it fell through the floor. "No!" he shouted. A few of the supers looked to see who had made the shout, but most sprang towards the Marquis. No Man, Renaissance Man, and Dauntless Dynamo, when he finally realized what happened, all shot towards him. They grabbed him before he could drop something else into the center of the earth. The Marquis casually shrugged Renaissance Man off, imbuing the motion with extra momentum. Renaissance Man was thrown aside, though the Marquis seemed to consider this more of a joke than a victory. No Man held himself in place when the Marquis tried the same trick on him. When he directed an attack on Dynamo, something else stopped him. Victor stood, mere feet away now, arm outstretched. The Marquis laughed and stopped struggling. "Well, you have a captive audience, at least until your power wears off. Of course, it will be far too late by then." "What do we do, knock him out?" Diego asked. "Won't matter," No Man said angrily. "He can lock in his power. That arrow will continue until he's out of energy. And he has plenty of energy." "Who is this?" Comrade Cosmos interrupted, putting a heavy hand threateningly on Victor's shoulder. "He's one of the cultists," Renaissance Man replied, "but he's currently nullifying the Marquis." "He's no more friend of the Marquis than any of us," Sekhmet Scion added. "The arrow is our real problem." "A problem, sure," Kid Cosmos said, "but one without a solution." "You give up too soon, Jeremy," Comrade Cosmos replied. "Now is no time to complain, but to work." The Mirrored Man, battered as ever, but still walking, approached the Marquis. "Ha ha!" The Marquis laughed. "You'll find I'm not quite as insane as you hoped. Your little mind reflection trick won't be as effective as it was against Director Adam."
"That is not what he has in mind,"
the Eye said. Before the Marquis could ask for clarification, the mirrored man placed the tips of his fingers against the sides of the Marquis's head. The Marquis froze as if paralyzed by an electric shock, his eyes twitching back and forth. 6.849 days until the arrow hits the dragon, the mirrored man reported robotically. Phew, Diego sighed. And I was worried there for a second. We've got plenty of time. Diego, the Earth isn't solid rock, Renaissance Man said. The mantle, Kid Cosmos realized. If we thought lava was hard to deal with, perhaps the arrow will simply be destroyed, Comrade Cosmos suggested. This was their plan B, Sekhmet Scion reminded him. I'd wager they made sure it could make the trip. They did, the mirrored man confirmed. The arrow is made from... How long until it falls through the crust? No Man interrupted. Somewhere between 1 hour 40 minutes and 10 seconds and 15 minutes and 8 seconds, depending on the thickness of the crust at this location. That's quite an error bar there, Kid Cosmos said, disturbed. Assume 15 minutes, Sekhmet Scion declared. Assume we dig, Comrade Cosmos commanded. Your No Man is the only one who can stop that arrow. We must get him to it. Crystal Crusader, or rather Orson Fiennes, as there were now 2 other Crusaders in the room, having arrived with the reinforcements, forced himself to his knees. He tried to stand, but couldn't quite manage it. My spirit, he began, trying to explain. Diego understood immediately. He zipped off and a few seconds later returned. There's plenty of equipment, especially fans and ventilation stuff, plus a couple of drills. Looks like Edward didn't carve out the base alone. Allow us, one of the Crusaders, Victor Vance, offered. Diego grabbed him and his partner and rushed them to the machinery so their spirits could drag it all into the main chamber. Sekhmet Scion and Comrade Cosmos didn't wait for them to return to start planning. By the time the machinery arrived, they had a plan that they quickly conveyed to the 3 crystal spirits. The blue sprites began to shape the metal into the desired shape. The giant drill bit was placed directly over the arrow hole. The plasmic giant turned into his glowing green goo and slipped under the metal creation. Carefully adjusting the bite of his liquid form, he began to melt through the rock, but not the metal. The crystal spirits started to spin the drill bit, one keeping it level, one keeping it spinning, and one pumping out the rock and sludge the drill expelled as waste. Immediately, Renaissance Man began to coordinate the heroes who had arrived as reinforcements. Anyone with a suitable power was directed to help guide the slush and rock out of the cavern, out of the mountain, letting it dribble off into a safe and uninhabited part of the island, and eventually into the ocean. The drill bit was making slow progress, not even digging far enough to submerge itself below ground level. Kid Cosmos, Comrade Cosmos, and Ironclaw all flew into the air. They fired their concussive beams from their hands, striking a central metal plate the crystal spirits had prepared. Soon, the 2 Ashvelians and their artificial counterpart were generating enough force to push themselves higher into the air, even without their feet emitting a steady wave of force. As planned, they flipped around, as if standing on their hands now, and pushed downward from their feet, the concussive beams now driving the drill bit further into the earth. Finally, the drill fell below ground level, and Dynamo jumped on. The crystal spirit strapped his torso to an unmoving bit of drill while his feet hit the top of the drill bit itself. Immediately, he started running at full speed, pushing against the slanted steps the spirits had installed in a circle around the edge of the bit. Dynamo's speed and force accelerated the drilling, and it finally began to make some real progress. But Dynamo only had so much energy reserves. To replenish them, he needed to be in contact with the Earth. So, just as planned, when the drill sank low enough that Dynamo was surrounded by a rock wall, he stretched out his hand and touched the newly created wall. Immediately, his stores of energy replenished, and he soon found a Goldilocks zone where he could impart all of the gained energy into the drill without draining himself dry. But as he did so, the drill accelerated, and the rapidly shifting wall began to scrape at his hand, even through his padded glove. Sekhmet Scion leapt down beside him and placed her hand on his shoulder. Immediately, her healing power repaired Dynamo's hand, though it would need to continuously do so from then on. No Man in the Eye leapt down onto the drill as well. Neither of them had any immediate responsibilities, but would be essential to the mission. No Man, of course, had to catch the arrow, as only he could do it, and it was up to the Eye to spot the arrow as well as any other complications that might arise. Orson Fiennes and the Crystal Crusaders tossed down their gems. While normally against protocol to allow their spirits to control the crystals by themselves, this was one of those emergency exceptions. The crystals were quickly embedded into the drill to allow a quick recharge when the spirits ran low on energy. The Crusaders themselves would have taken up too much room on the already crowded machine. The Broken Man's shards suddenly swarmed down, each one attached to a hose, which connected to various parts of the drill. The hoses, through the power of the other supers, pumped out the waste material that had once been the rock they were drilling through. It quickly became apparent that was going to be the biggest limiting factor. While they could pump in plenty of power, the rock still had to go somewhere. Renaissance Man shouted at the other supers. The crystal spirits morphed the metal as the others lowered a newly created wider hose. The Broken Man attached the new hose and the drill surged forward. It rocketed downward at unprecedented speed. Between the crystal spirits operating and fixing the drill as it spun, the force of Dynamo and the Ashfelians, and the acidic touch of the Plasmic Man, it churned through the earth as if it were hardly there. Based on rotational velocity, we are descending at roughly 5 meters a second, Orson's crystal spirit announced to everyone's comms. I can tell, Dynamo said, gritting his teeth as his continuously healing hand still scraped against the tunnel wall. Insufficient, the Mirrored Man said. The arrow is at a depth of 1.4 kilometers already. We're moving faster though, right? Sekhmet asked. When will we overtake it? Wait. He's thinking, the Mirrored Man said. You will overtake it at a depth of 65.47 kilometers. Nobody stopped, but there was an uncomfortable moment of dead air on the line. That's over twice as deep as our generous estimate for the thickness of the crust, No Man finally stated. What speed do we need? Sekhmet finally asked the Mirrored Man. There was a pause. Then, 7 meters per second. That's only 2 more than our current speed, Rashida announced over disgruntled moans. We're already breaking records at 5, Renaissance Man reminded her. Then let's set a high mark, Scion replied, refusing to be deterred even as she felt her stores of healing energy begin to drop. And then the transmission came. Stormbreakers, this is Fatal Harmony, a voice said over the comm. We will be in orbit over your position in 4 minutes. Our main energy cannon is fully online and operational. Are they seriously suggesting, Kid started to ask? We can overcharge the cannon to make a precision strike on Fogo. Our estimates project we can penetrate the entire crust. Nothing will remain after that. Not even us, Dynamo noted. Nor the civilians, No Man added. This strike would be at a high cost, Sekhmet noted. Can you guarantee it will work? As much as I can guarantee anything, the captain replied. I have to consider, Sekhmet said. A small sacrifice for the greater good, Comrade Cosmos observed. It isn't a hard choice. We aren't out of options yet, Sekhmet replied. All right, fine then, Kid Cosmos said over the strain. Send me a crystal spirit. Can we spare one? Sekhmet asked towards the drill beneath her. When compared to the strain you are all under, this is something we can manage, Orson's spirit replied, and one of the other bright blue sparks shot up through the tunnel, finally coming to a stop in front of Kid Cosmos. The Xenocyte, Kid explained as he tried to maintain focus on the concussive beam. The bullet, in my pocket. Fuse with it. Change the radiation if you can. Amplify my strength. Can you do that? Comrade Cosmos asked of the spirit. In reply, it dove into Kid's pocket and emerged with the green bullet that had earlier pierced Kid's hand. The Xenocyte began to glow a friendlier shade of green, and Kid felt a renewed sense of strength. Your hand is injured, Comrade Cosmos noted. Your output is lowered. Give me the Xenocyte. Kid's blue eyes met the comrade's gray ones. It is dangerous, the comrade continued. You are much younger than I. Kid nodded. The crystal spirit flew the Xenocyte over to Comrade Cosmos and wove it into his coat. Then it energized the green material, and Comrade Cosmos grimaced in pain. Then his beams brightened, and on the drill they felt a surge of sudden force. Comrade Cosmos used all of his renewed strength to fire his hand beams downwards, deep into the earth. What's the speed? Sekhmet asked. Sorry, busy, the crystal spirit replied. The drill is nearly being torn apart. Approaching coordinates, Stormbreakers, the captain of the Fatal Harmony said. What's the word? 7 meters per second achieved, the eye announced, carefully examining the speed at which the walls shot up around them. Yes! Dynamo shouted between breaths. Now we just need to maintain it, Renaissance Man reminded them. Yes, Sekhmet Scion affirmed. For how long? Stormbreakers, what's the order? The captain asked again. 9 minutes, the Mirrored Man replied. But this time, instead of despair, Dynamo answered, "That's nothing." "If he can do it," Kid said, "no way we can't." "If you consider this a challenge," Comrade Cosmos shocked everyone by joining in, "then I am most disappointed to have been nearly defeated by you." "As they say," Renaissance Man said, "challenge accepted." "Stormbreakers," the captain began again. "Abort, Captain," Sekhmet Scion ordered. "We have this under control." "Acknowledged," the captain said. "Just want to remind you that once we make the pass, we won't get another shot." "Understood," Scion replied. "But as I said, we've got this." "Godspeed," the captain said, signing off. The supers all pushed on, knowing victory was possible so long as they maintained their current effort. Knowing the consequences, each of them pushed beyond their normal limits, maintaining pace no matter what. Up top, the logistical battle became more and more difficult as more and more hose and more power was necessary to haul up the displaced rock. But none of the newly arrived heroes complained, instead taking the effort of the Stormbreakers and Commissars as a personal challenge. 9 minutes of hellish effort. 9 minutes as they felt their bodies move beyond the breaking point. 9 minutes, and then... The drill shuddered violently. "Adjusting," Orson's spirit announced. "Is that it?" Sekhmet asked eagerly. "Yes," the spirit confirmed shortly.
"It's tearing apart the drill as it spins,"
the eye noted, looking carefully down into the machinery. The arrow, maintaining a perfect course, was cutting through the drill as the rotating machine plowed into it. The crystal spirits didn't let that stop them, however. They instead fused with the metal and redesigned the drill on the fly, fixing it as the arrow slowly passed through it.
"Not yet,"
the eye said as No Man prepared. But he knew that. He couldn't grab it while it was in the machine. His field would halt the drill in place, forcing it to a stop and ripping it apart. No, he waited until... The arrow popped out of the top of the drill. In an instant, No Man created a field that surrounded the arrow and only the arrow. For a moment, they kept drilling, even as they passed a depth of 4¼ kilometers. The arrow was encased in a field that held it still relative to No Man's hand. Still, as they fell, for a moment, no one dared to believe the arrow had stopped. No Man moved his hand to the side. The arrow followed the movement exactly. Everyone cheered and immediately relented from the constant push. The drill nearly stopped in its tracks, only the crystal spirits ensuring that it kept spinning just a little, enough to slow the descent. Well, perhaps not gracefully, but non-fatally. As the dust settled, Sekhmet Scion had just enough remaining strength to check on Diego, who gave a tired thumbs up. Even though he had been doing more physical work, he had gotten a recharge. Scion, on the other hand, had used purely her own reserves. Soon, reinforcements arrived and lifted Sekhmet Scion and the others back to the surface. As soon as they arrived, the throngs of supers burst into applause and the arrow No Man snatched was carried around like a trophy. But when Sekhmet turned to see how the Marquis reacted to this, she was taken aback by another sight. Victor, lying motionless on the floor, an arrow through his heart. "It seems the Marquis escaped briefly," Comrade Cosmos explained. None of the Stormbreakers were convinced. The next day, and a delegation from the Galactic Concordance had arrived in Earth orbit. Their star cruiser dwarfed even the Fatal Harmony, and it was clear that the rumor of an old god waking had disturbed them greatly. And on board, it fell not just to the world leaders, but to Sekhmet Scion to assure the alien delegates of the worthiness of Earth to join the Concordance. Again. So once again, she stood before the council. A beefy winged Elgra was just getting done saying, "This is why Earth cannot be relied on." "What would have happened had we been rejected from the Concordance?" Scion asked. The question took the others aback for just a second. "I don't see," the SIFA representative began. "If we were an independent world, this would still have happened, except you would have had no warning if the dragon did wake," Scion explained. "We could have deployed our forces freely," the Elgra said in a somewhat threatening tone. "By the time you would have heard, it would have been too late," Scion repeated. "The travel time on the surface of the planet was nearly too great. The travel time between stars would have been far more so. You are proposing a solution to a different problem." "And what problem is that?" the Elgra demanded. You want an answer to the problem of how we'll shake up the stars, Scion said simply.
I hope that isn't some form of threat,
the Sifa chimed in. It's a fact. No more, no less, Scion replied. Any new species coming onto the galactic stage will change things, and few people like change. I'm sure many of your people, by which she meant many of those on the council, would like nothing more than the status quo to remain. But it never does, and it can't. This incident with the Great Earth Dragon simply reminds you of how much can change, and it scares you. Not because of the possible threat, though that is a legitimate fear. No, many are far more afraid because of the potential this reminds you that we have. I dare say many would be less afraid if we had failed.
You are overlooking how divided your world remains, the Elgra muttered a little less passionately.
Hardly, Scion responded quickly. We on Earth are reminded of this grim truth every day. But once again, it is the tremendous potential we have that keeps this unfortunate status quo. But as I said before, no status quo remains forever. And one day we will solve our problems at home. More than that, one day we will bring the tools to solve problems you have yet to face. This is the burden we have by living on a planet blessed by an old god, Scion continued. The curse of danger, ever present, but the promise of potential, eternal and limitless. If you want to turn your back on that potential out of fear, then you may do so, but I suspect you will regret it when you most need it. Neither the alien counselors nor the Earth leaders looked particularly comfortable with that statement, with that gambit. Well, good, Scion thought. The big issues shouldn't be comfortable. Let them sweat it out a bit. It's only a fraction of what is felt on the real fronts. The Sifa finally cleared his throat.
Very well, he said. Why don't we reconvene in an hour?
As the bell chimed, Scion knew that the momentum had ground to a halt. They would discuss it for the rest of the day, and many of the politicians would make hay over the issue back home, but it didn't matter. Because the fact remained, Earth was still important to the rest of the galaxy. They wouldn't be forgotten. Kid Cosmos stepped into the hospital room. Orson Fiennes was still lying on his cot.
Hey, he said to the older hero. Please tell me you didn't come here to rub it in that I'm still stuck here, Orson said.
The damage done to him was taking longer to heal due to the medical nanomachines in his system. While normally Sekhmet could have put him back on his feet in minutes, she didn't want to interfere with the little robots, which were holding some of Orson's important bits together. I would never, Kid said with a mischievous smile. I'm not Dynamo, remember?
You spend enough time around him, Orson muttered.
Kid took a seat next to his cot. So, working with your enemy, Kid began.
I'm not defending him, Orson quickly put in, remembering Victor's fate.
Nah, of course not, Jeremy agreed quickly. It just got me thinking. Director Adams, he thought that what he was doing was saving the world or something.
Yeah?
Orson said slowly. I was kind of wondering. You said you would trust him if it meant saving the world or something, but you never stopped to consider if he was right about this.
He didn't exactly give me a reason to trust him, Orson pointed out. Both he and that super in the black armor were pretty tight-lipped. When I was talking about working with an enemy, I meant when there was a clear goal and a mutual interest in mind.
Fair enough, Kid said.
Are you wondering if they had a point? Orson asked.
Kid hesitated. It's just that no one knows what the Great Earth Dragon would do if it woke, and it's affected our world so much. It almost makes me think...
Go on.
Well, if it is a force for good, we should have woken it.
But we don't know that.
And that's what scares me, Kid admitted. If it isn't, maybe we're in more trouble than we thought. Maybe we should have found out. Because if it is a danger, what could any of us do against it? Crystal Crusader thought for a long time.
If it is malicious, he finally said slowly, we still might not be alone. There are other old gods out there. We have allies. There's no rush to find out.
Yes,
Orson's crystal spirit said, suddenly appearing in the air next to him.
Just as Orson Fiennes and Trealin 4 can work together, so can humanity and the old gods.
It took a second for Kid Cosmos to realize what it was talking about. Wait, he said, is that your name? Orson smiled.
It is.
Jeremy smiled as well, remembering what Orson had told him about crystal spirits and their names. While the issue still remained, maybe Orson was right. There might still be a little hope left. The black armor still leaked. Its wearer had tried everything, but the damage was surprisingly severe. On the outbound journey from Fogo, the leak had been dangerous, but it hadn't been fast. Staying would have risked further damage, but it was intact enough for the escape. Once disassembled, however, it was easier to see that the damage had been more extensive than expected. The piece of the broken man had lodged its way through several subsystems, and the suit's atmosphere containment was effectively useless. It had to be taken into the round metal hub its wearer used for a base. Inside that pressurized compartment, it had been safe to remove. Still, repairs would be difficult, and they would take time. It had been a disaster. Worse than a disaster. Everything was on track to happen just as it had before. The Great Earth Dragon had been the best bet. For a change to take hold, the event had to be big. Really big. According to the calculations, there weren't many that would do. The awakening of the dragon would easily have been big enough. It was the best bet. It had been worth even bringing in someone as unstable as Director Adam, or working with the cult to pull it off. But now it was over. Maybe it could be tried again, but the resources and planning necessary would be very tricky, and time was running out every day. The figure in black tested the new seals. The suit held. Good. Being in this time was difficult on the body, and without the suit, walking outside the little pod was impossible. The figure put the suit back on and with a hiss opened the door to the outside world. She took a deep breath. She couldn't smell the air outside, of course, but it was relieving to have more space. But no time to savor it. She had work to do. The future would not fix itself. Back at the Stormbreakers base, Rashida was finishing some reports at the newly replaced round table in the newly rebuilt conference room. Standing not too far away was Renaissance Man, looking out the window, hands behind his back. "You could help with these," Rashida suggested.
"I could," Renaissance Man said.
Realizing the futility of the suggestion, Rashida closed the lid of the laptop and joined Reynold at the window. "Victor still on your mind?" she asked. Renaissance Man raised an eyebrow and looked over. If it had been anyone else, he would have claimed it was just a lucky guess.
"I was thinking of what Dynamo said," he explained.
"About you being hard on him," Rashida guessed. "You're not thinking that makes you responsible for what happened, are you?"
"Maybe things would have turned out differently," Renaissance Man said darkly.
Rashida sighed.
"It's possible," she admitted.
She checked over her shoulder that no one was there, then continued.
"Do you want to know what I think?"
Her conspiratorial whisper interested the Renaissance Man.
"I'm listening," he said.
"I don't think there was anything you could have done."
I know, she said as Renaissance Man gave her another bemused yet surprised look.
"It's not something I would normally say. Normally I would say everyone deserves a second chance or something, and I mean that. But to be honest, Victor had made his choices. He was in that cult for a reason. And sometimes there are people you just can't reach."
"You're not talking about just Victor now," Renaissance Man pointed out.
"As close as we come to seeing it," Rashida said, "there is no pure evil. Not even the spirit of Sekhmet is evil for the sake of evil. That personality, self-centered and malicious as it is, has its reasons for doing what it does. Bad reasons, misanthropic, malformed reasons. But it does it not because of some abstract evil, but because that is who it has become. It could have changed once, like any other person, but it will never choose to do so. Not that I can see."
"And you don't think Victor would have either," Renaissance Man guessed.
"Not in the time we had."
Renaissance Man clenched his fist.
"We should have had more."
"But that isn't your fault," Rashida reminded him. "That's the comrades' fault."
"I won't forget,"
Renaissance Man promised. After a moment, he shifted, releasing his tension. He changed the subject.
"How do you think Psycherge is doing?"
"He's probably better than all of us, to be honest."
"You think we'll ever see him again?"
Rashida thought for a moment.
"I'm honestly not sure. It seems every day there's a new super with a new power. Maybe one will have an unprecedented connection to the spirit world, and we'll see him sooner than any of us expect. Or maybe not.
It would be interesting to hear what he had thought about getting so close to the dragon, Renaissance Man mused.
Yes, actually I was thinking, Rashida said, about something you once said. You said that we, by nature, always react to threats.
How could it be otherwise? Renaissance Man asked.
It can't, Rashida conceded. We can't see the future, we can't stop crimes before they happen, unless maybe this was our one chance to do that.
Regrets?
Thoughts.
Either way, I didn't figure you for the religious sort.
Reynolds, all these years and you still don't know me that well. I am named after a god, after all.
We trade secrets, Renaissance Man said. We don't talk about ourselves.
Maybe we should change that. Renaissance Man looked at her.
It would never work.
Rashida, catching his meaning, was suddenly flustered. That's not what I meant.
Renaissance Man replied.
I'm serious. I just meant we should talk as friends more often.
I'm still immortal and still don't do attachments. It would never work.
Renaissance Man started walking towards the exit, which just made Sekhmet Scion more indignant. You can still talk, can't you? Surely even mopey I'm so different and special Renaissance Man knows how to make friends, right? Or is that the problem?
Please stop. You're embarrassing yourself, Renaissance Man said, turning the corner.
Dauntless Dynamo stepped over towards No Man. Once again, the latter was looking down from the observation catwalks into the cells. The roofs, opaque from within, were transparent from above. The cell No Man was fixated on contained, unsurprisingly, the Marquis. Jiang, Dynamo said in greeting. No Man nodded back, but didn't say anything. The guards tell me he's being moved to maximum security tomorrow. 24-hour nullification, constant monitoring. Odds are he's never going to be a problem again. We've thought that before, No Man replied. Diego sighed. You know, it's not your fault. Just because fate intertwined your powers doesn't mean you're responsible for what he's done. I know. Still, I have a unique ability to stop him. Not that you have to do it alone. No, of course not. No Man thought a moment, then said, You know, it surprised me that he joined the cult. How so? He has always worked alone, or with simple hired guns before. His unique personality led me to think of him as a singular entity. It's still difficult for me to imagine him taking orders from anyone else. Yeah, I can see that, Diego agreed. It surprised me just how many former acquaintances we ran into with that group. It seems the pull of the desire for meaning is stronger than we thought. Was that it, though? Some of those guys seemed to think this was about preventing some great evil. Isn't that in itself a meaning one might search for? You're giving me a headache, Diego said. I just wish we had a few solid answers about this supposed disaster coming up. Are you worried what they said was true? That waking the dragon was the only way to stop it? Nah, you kidding? Catching that arrow was next to impossible too, but we did it. It sounded like Director Adam and the Speedster would have called in the Fatal Harmony if they were in our shoes. I don't do defeatism, and neither should you. No Man continued to stare at the Marquis's cell. Still worried about him? Dynamo asked. No Man tapped his index finger against his chin. He is secure. There is a nullifier on him at all times. You're still worried about him. No Man frowned. Inside the cell, the Marquis continued to mutter something. Every second, on the mark, he said, Tick, tick, tick. There was a period of 4 minutes when he was conscious and before a new nullifier could contain him. During that chaos in the celebration, he never attempted to wake the dragon again. Perhaps he changed his mind, Dynamo suggested. No, he didn't believe that either. But he had learned that sometimes there are mysteries that would never be solved. Not that he, for one, would stop trying. No Man watched the Marquis for a minute longer, then sighed. He nodded to Dynamo, and the two walked to the exit. Inside the cell, the Marquis kept the count. His wide eyes seemed to stare off into space. Only he saw the object of his fixation. Give it up, Marquis, Victor said. His translucent form was tinged gray, his color lacking a lot of the vibrancy it had in life. But despite that, behind his grim little smile, his eyes sparkled with purpose. 42 hours, 33 minutes, and 27 seconds, he announced to no one's ears but the Marquis. Tick, 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 the Marquis counted even as his eye twitched. 30 seconds, Victor corrected. And I'm still going strong. Even if you escape here again, as long as I'm with you, you'll never use your powers again. The Marquis gritted his teeth and continued counting. But by now, even he knew the little man was right, and his spirit wasn't going anywhere.
Next time, Agents Red and Blue, two top-secret operatives, are sent to another dimension to rebalance the scales. Blasters as their offense, time tokens as their defense, the two agents take on the Tyrant of Pompeii and his weapon powered by psychic metal. A reality-bending adventure, next time on the Mirage Barrage.